there's a window opening. Economic crisis and a constitutional crisis coming to a head. We're going to be going through some shit.
Look at history and acknowledge that things like this can happen, things like this have happened, things like this are happening right now.
The gray state is a part of this Orwellian nightmare that's being set up.
Their vision for what's next is a global Fed and even more power.
The potential complete collapse of America, of a global economy.
One world government.
New world order.
It's real. A lot of people are realizing it, and more people are going to have to.
You are a slave.
The system is failing us, and the bottom line is that something has to be done.
This is an empire in decline. If we don't do something drastic to put the federal government in check, we're going to be doing things the hard way with a violent collapse.
We are already beginning to fall to the gray state.
We're already halfway there. This is the path we're already on.
Civil war is staring us in the face.
Trends like the slow yielding of our quiet American towns to a choking array of federal surveillance grids, illegal police checkpoints, and literal foreign occupation.
That is exactly the kind of abuse of power that led to the first American Revolution.
What is it that keeps it from happening in the United States? Is this the kind of world I want to live in?
The gray state is a symptom. The disease is statism. The morality that we expect ourselves to adhere to, the standards of behavior and conduct, like when you were taught in kindergarten, don't hit and don't steal, it wasn't unless you're a cop or an IRS agent. You know, when you learned thou shalt not kill, it wasn't unless your dear leader gives you a gun and a badge and a one-way ticket to the other side of the world. Those were moral absolutes, but what we are doing now is institutionalizing them in government and creating this moral exception for people that have the socially granted monopoly on the initiation of force over a given geographical area by calling it government and pretending that it's good for us.
The only thing that makes the government different from any other organization is the government has the ability to compel people to do things via force. You got to look at that whole idea that it's okay for us to do this, but not for you to do this.
They want you to feel defeated, they want you to feel powerless, and that is how they basically get away with rape, theft, and murder. It's like massive Stockholm Syndrome.
We see it every day. We see it in the news. We see it on headlines, but people still don't acknowledge it.
We are already living in a world where government has become a detriment to human liberty by any measure. It's such an obvious level.
We are already going into a scientifically designed Orwellian control system that is meant to use humans up like natural resources.
The stripping of your rights, your liberties, your freedom, private property, even your free will. That is the gray state. And yes, it is real, and yes, it is here.
Jewel Beat.
The free enterprise system is based off 5 features: economic freedom, incentives, competition, voluntary exchange, and private property.
Basically, we believe as free market economists that people have a right to private property, that prices are driven from the market, people that are buying and selling goods and services.
Whereas a socialist system doesn't have those features. Then you talk more about public property and what can the state control versus what can the individual control.
If I buy something from you, it's because I value your product more than my money, and you are going to value that money more than that product. and we both benefit. Anytime you introduce force into that equation in any form, you subtract from humanity's potential to reach that ideal of prosperity and progress.
You can't force someone by law to buy something. Otherwise, voluntary exchange doesn't exist. You can see that with Obamacare, different mandates for consumers to purchase various goods and services. So that is a progression towards socialism. You're mandated to purchase certain items from the state.
Individual people can do much better in bringing up an entire economic society by themselves and not being ordered to do certain things. Command economies, that sort of thing. That's why all command economies essentially fail.
That's what they did in Europe. You couldn't keep the benefits of your own labor, your own hard work and sweat. It would be confiscated by some corporate entity that had control over the monetary system. We had a nation of producers. We had a nation of people who were free to innovate and create and then be allowed to reap the benefits of that creativity. If you invented the television set, the state's not going to come in and say, we're confiscating that from you for the public good. You were then allowed to market it. It generated wealth, savings of money. You had more and more local hardware stores competing against each other. When you have greater competition, you have reduction in prices. Obviously, the people who can provide the highest quality product, the lowest price, are going to win out. Those who cannot will fail. That's what a free market is. It's the freedom to succeed and fail.
It's a simple fact of the superiority of using persuasion to get people to do what you want to do, as opposed to saying, well, I'm scared and I don't trust you and I'm going to just have someone with government put a gun to your head and do what I want you to do.
When people give money to Bill Gates or Sam Walton, he's not taking it from them. They're getting something in return. They're getting a service. They're getting a product. There is an organization out there that does take the money from you, and that's the government.
If you live in the United States and you work in the United States, you fall under our jurisdiction.
Does that mean that everyone in North America is a slave to your company?
I don't work for a company.
You work for the IRS. Is everyone is a slave to the IRS?
I believe that I do have jurisdiction. I believe it is valid. I believe I do have those rights, yes.
Okay, but you can't, by your own admission, answer a question regarding evidence to actually prove that there's jurisdiction.
Right, just so you can answer those questions.
So you have faith that you have jurisdiction. You don't have any actual evidence, and you're not qualified to determine if there is evidence to back that assertion up.
Correct.
Blind faith. That's really impressive when you're talking about other people's property and other people's lives, to have blind faith in a violent, aggressive system.
You don't have a choice about whether or not you can do business with the government. If you don't want to use our services, that's fine, but you're still going to pay for those services. If you don't have kids, you're still going to pay for public school. If you're not sick, you're still going to pay for health care. And if you don't pay, we're going to send people with guns to take your money and take your house, and take you.
The feudal era, you had a feudal king or lord who would claim half of your crops in exchange for protection. And because the peasants didn't know any better, they could get away with that scam.
Hey, give me $20 or I'll shoot you or I'll throw you in prison, which is, what taxes are. No one pays taxes because they want to. Taxes are collected at the barrel of a gun. All laws are enforced at the barrel of a gun.
Now, the facade of statism has to include them throwing us a lot of bones. When a farmer will provide health care for his livestock in the same way that a government wants to keep the tax cows healthy and productive.
They bribe us with our own money. They tax us, and then they take that money and they push it back out. What they hope we don't notice is they take that money from us in the first place.
Without the income tax, America historically became the wealthiest country on earth because it goes back to the benefits of a savings-based economy where you're able to accumulate savings and you're not forced to turn it over to a governing authority to redistribute as it sees fit.
If you have a business, you're supposed to file as your business expenses, your business accounts, nonprofits, everything else. But you as an individual, there's no law stating that you have to file taxes on your income.
Understand that your income tax is a farce. The 16th Amendment of the United States was never properly ratified by Congress.
People people today believe that taxation is absolutely necessary. Like Winston Churchill said, it's the penalty for living in a civil society. This is not true. We lived without an income tax. New Hampshire today still exists without the income tax, and they're thriving. They're doing fine.
You think it's moral to force people to follow your rules, and you think that's moral. You think it's moral to force people to do what you want and to pay you. And we don't believe it's moral to force people under threat to
I disagree with the word force. Yeah, I disagree with the word force, but I think it's moral that you should have to pay your taxes, absolutely.
So it's moral to force people to pay for services they may or may not want.
Yes, it is moral to pay for things that you may or may not want.
So by doing things voluntarily and not using aggressive force and asking questions, that to you is immoral. But the opposite of being involuntary, using aggressive force and not questioning, that's moral to you.
One reason why the income tax is so detrimental is based on the assumption that the government owns everything and they allow us to keep a certain percentage under their conditions.
Which proves the point that even a 1% income tax is morally wrong because it sows the seeds of destruction.
The gray state is a symptom of the step backwards of statism that we're experiencing right now. 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards is the course of human progress. And I can look back and say, well, we started the major step backward in 1913 that was the Federal Reserve.
The Federal Reserve legislation was drafted on an island, really called Jekyll Island. All these bankers, the heads of J.P. Morgan and the other large banks at the time got together on this island, secretly drafted the legislation and all that stuff. I think that name is perfect, the creature from Jekyll Island. It's this creature.
The Congress was on leave for Christmas and had a silent vote. Less than 10 votes. It actually got through.
And all of a sudden, the Fed Board of Governors became the all-powerful entity. So what you did was you gave someone a monopoly, and then they brought that monopoly into D.C. No different than the IMF today, no different than all the corporations and all the guilds, all the unions that are coming to D.C. to seek their monopoly favors.
So basically what it is that the Federal Reserve is 80% owned privately, but yet it prints our currency, depicts our interest rates, tells us how much commodity products are.
There's nothing federal about the Federal Reserve. It's a private establishment owned and run by offshore banks.
The Federal Reserve is a criminal organization. Did you people know that America doesn't even own its own money supply?
It's within our Constitution to be able to print our own money. Congress should have control over it. The Federal Reserve took that away.
This private central authority is going to loan money to your government at interest, so they make money off that debt. And then the federal government pays them back plus interest via taxation.
And basically it prints false money, money out of thin air.
I look at it as the age-old struggle of the philosopher's stone, where we used to try and find a way back in the old days to create gold, which was money and always has been money, out of lead, and they never could figure out a way to do it. So that's sort of like the rapture occurred when they realized we can substitute gold with paper money, which we can create infinitely at a very low cost.
When they want to spend more than they make off the revenue from the people, that's where they borrow money from the Federal Reserve. Basically open it a credit card.
So this debt is only valid so far as our public is able to cover that debt based upon our level of income taxes.
Federal income taxes does one thing, and that's it. When you pay taxes on your income, that goes directly to the Federal Reserve to pay interest on the debt that they create. Anybody not understand that?
Anything they cannot pay for via taxation, they turn on the printing presses. At this point, it's analogous to a Mickey Mantle rookie baseball card. You give some governing authority the right to create photocopies of this, pass them off at the same thing. What's going to happen to the existing value of all other Mickey Mantle signed rookie cards in good condition? Well, they used to be rare, so they had value. Now they eliminated demand. They took us off the gold standard. They took us off the oil standard. Oil is now traded in euros and other currencies, so there's not as much incentive to invest in the United States. And now they're increasing the supply. So you have declining demand, and you have greater supply.
Many a country has tried this in the past. It ends up badly.
You can't just print money and say it's worth something. That's only going to work for so long.
What gives our paper its value is its world reserve status. Every currency on earth is backed to some degree or some percentage by US dollars. What used to give that value was that it was backed by something else of value. In our case, we had the highest gold reserves of any country on earth. We had an agreement under Bretton Woods with Saudi Arabia and OPEC, you know, the oil and petroleum exporting nations of the world, that their oil would only be traded exclusively in US dollars. Every other country on earth had to buy US treasuries and convert their currency to US dollars to get oil, which every economy needs to function, of course. That was the key to our prosperity in the early days.
It's an illusion, it's a mass delusion to say that a Northern Ireland pound has intrinsic value. It's only valuable if somebody takes it. And if you go try to spend that down in London, 9 times out of 10, people say, I don't want that. That's not real money. That's not a British pound. It's a symbolic representation of an exchange medium.
That's the beauty of gold, silver, and other commodities. They don't lose their value. It just is what it is. It discourages moral hazard and unnecessary risk. If you couldn't afford it, you didn't buy it. This was not poverty. This was responsibility. So they're funneling all this money that otherwise didn't exist. They're creating it literally out of thin air, loaning it to the banks, and they loan it at interest.
You go to a bank, you get a loan, they basically transfer that money out of thin air into your account, and it's a debt. But it came out of nowhere, so technically that's fraud.
Since the 1970s, we did not have the ability to cover our debts via taxation. It's not popular to raise taxes. You're not going to vote for the politician who does that because that gets old. But we hate it when they stop spending. We like the free goodies. So that's why it is we're in such a deficit crisis and they spend so much money. It's popular to spend, it's unpopular to tax. So what do? We have the Federal Reserve paper it over.
The problem is Congress, the federal bureaucracy, and the military bureaucracies. And remember what runs those things. Cash. When you fly into Ronald Reagan National Airport, as you're getting ready to land, if you look towards the Washington Monument, you will see this enormous mountain of cash. The problem with that mountain of cash is it's a magnet for all the wrong people. Everybody in the Beltway exists to get their hands on some of that cash. It essentially creates a situation in which everyone is for sale.
Again, to go back to the Mayor Amschel Rothschild quote, who was founder of the Bank of England, granting control over a nation's currency. I care not who makes its laws. Now, they do not directly influence public opinion, the laws, or anything like that. They do so, however, indirectly, because they control the money, so they care not who makes the laws, because they can use that money, which they can create in perpetuity out of nothing, and give it to their preferred representatives in government and help shape the agenda.
In every administration, there has been someone or multiple people associated to the Federal Reserve. Isn't that interesting? Why is that?
People, when getting into office, can borrow money from the Federal Reserve directly for their political campaigns. They necessarily don't have to pay that money back out of their own savings or their own donations. They just leave that as national debt that the United States owes the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is happy to create that debt because every dollar created, they get more interest paid back to them. Once they've taken this money from the Federal Reserve, it's like selling your soul to the devil. You don't really have a choice in which bills you pass or which ones you vote no or yes for.
Listen, there isn't much altruism when you're flooded with cash.
That is one very insidious way that the Federal Reserve impacts public policy. And they use, again, these various roundtable groups as a conduit to accomplish this indirectly. So it doesn't look like the Federal Reserve doing it. But that's ultimately what happens.
How long have they been trying to do this?
Forever. Bankers are like that. Yeah, if you let them do it. What you need is gutsy presidents, gutsy Congress people to prevent it.
Obama's entire cabinet stems from the Federal Reserve. If you don't believe me, look it up.
It's a win-win situation for government to spend. It's something that government's never going to be held accountable for. It's a way of free money for them.
The elite use the banking and financial industries as a mode of control because either you're owned by them or you owe money to them. So either way, it's kind of like this leash of control around everybody.
Today, if you create an invention, you're much less likely to run a company that employs people for very long because you're going to have a very large bank or a very large corporate entity come in and simply buy your product. It essentially allows them to confiscate the creativity of you and I, of regular people. It allows them to not produce, to not achieve, to not create something of a great value that the public will demand and consume. They didn't have to do that themselves. All they had to do was control the monetary supply. And they can then buy up for pennies on the dollar, essentially, your creation, your innovation, and market it to the masses. And then they can siphon off millions in taxpayer dollars for having produced nothing.
As humans, we're designed to worry about the next tribe coming over and attacking our clan. And men are designed to look out towards the horizon and see threats. But we only see military threats or criminal threats or thugs. We have not been designed to see corporate threats where global corporations get their people into government, then the traders in government create new systems and sign government authority over to that.
The conspiracy is one of human nature. And the moneyed power is using that moneyed influence to appeal to people's own based instincts and their own self-centeredness. You have to ultimately, in a free market, assume the risks and responsibilities associated with the freedom, again, to succeed and the freedom to fail. We don't have that. What you have today is a corporatocracy. You can essentially fail and you don't have to worry because you're going to get bailed out by the taxpayer. That's not a free market.
We don't have a free market. We have intertwined corporate interests, right? We have the hydra of these corporations that are addicted to cheap money, free credit, created by a privately owned corporation that monopolizes the creation of money.
So the Federal Reserve is going to create Mickey Mantle baseball cards ad nauseum and infinitum. They're going to just print them out to cover all these bad debts that went wrong when Goldman Sachs, Federal Reserve shareholder, decided to sell a whole bunch of these securitized mortgages thanks to the repeal of Glass-Steagall to foreign investors all over the world that went bad and they knew would go bad. The fraud element comes in, they knew they were going to go bad. So the Federal Reserve creates moral hazard again for these large banks by saying, don't worry, we'll paper it over.
We're in the midst of a serious financial crisis, and the federal government is responding with decisive action.
Over 700 points.
Apple shares are just getting hammered.
We're down by between 3 and 4.5%.
A national rescue plan.
$85 billion deal.
The worst economic crisis facing the United States. There are going to be ominous consequences.
We're in the last days of this country surviving.
Supply urgently needed money so banks and other financial institutions can avoid collapse and resume lending.
We bailed out the guys that created this mess. And those are the last people that should be bailed out. These people should be granted a free pass.
Not passing a bill now would cost these Americans much more later.
There would have been a depression for the rich people. They would have gone bankrupt, and instead, they got the bailouts and we got the bankruptcy.
People accepted it. They were like, yes, good. Well, at least we have jobs. At least the banks are okay because that's where our money goes.
And every time they manufacture a depression in the marketplace, they receive a bailout. Smaller competitors do not, so they can buy up the assets, again, the things of tangible, actual value from the productive people in the economy, and they're confiscating it on pennies on the dollar, because when you're liquidating in a Chapter 11 bankruptcy situation, you're going to take whatever you can get. Then Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Bank of America can swoop in, take control of all those assets. They didn't produce anything. They didn't make anyone's life better, but they're rolling in the dough, aren't they?
The primary problems here is that there's an absolute unification of money and power and government, and you need to try, for the sake of sanity and liberty, to try and prize those things apart, because at the moment they are one.
Is this triangle: corruption leads to secrecy and incompetence. It just breeds all this, and they just want to keep everything quiet.
In the Roman period, they used to talk about bread and circuses as entertainment for quote-unquote the mob. Let's increase prosperity and standard of living. Everybody gets to drive a better car. Everybody gets to live in a nicer home. And what we really want people to do is go to the mall and shop and be entertained. They've been very successful in turning the body of the American population into sedated consumers. Well, you can only sedate the consumer so long. When the consumer runs out of his ability to consume, when he suddenly wakes up and recognizes that what he thought he had, he doesn't, the money he thought he had is gone, the wealth he was promised is vanished, that's when the game is up. today inside Washington. The mainstream mentality is that you and I and the rest of us that are talking in these terms are out of touch with reality. They cannot begin to comprehend what you and I are discussing today, and I think that's very important for your viewers to understand.
Our banking system is a safe and a sound one.
Our deficit problems are completely manageable.
Everything will be fine. We'll pass some reforms, some new legislation. We'll make it all right.
Part of the scam of government by printing money, by borrowing money. We don't have to tax people directly. We can commit intergenerational child abuse and pass that bill off to the people who are unborn, who, when born into America, have a $45,000 stone around their neck as their share of just the federal debt in its most conservatively estimated forms.
People keep throwing around these numbers that were 15 trillion in debt, 16, 17. Those are all old numbers. It came out in Bloomberg Financial and other news outlets that under Obama's administration, in the first 2 years, over 23.7 trillion is missing. And those are old numbers, and that's on top of all the missing trillion from Bush.
If you had $1 million and you started counting one at a time, it would take you 11.5 days to get to 1 million. If you were going to count to $1 billion, it would take you 31.7 years. In 1 trillion seconds, it's 31,700 years. That's the difference between a million, a billion, and a trillion. So a million seconds ago, 11.5 days ago, a billion seconds ago, 1980, a trillion seconds ago, 29,688 BC.
The way Bush has done it over the last 8 years is to take out a credit card from the Bank of China in the name of our children, driving up our national debt.
Raising the debt ceiling, which has been done over 100 times, does not increase our debt.
We have now seen our national debt go to the tune of $211 trillion if you consider all of the government guarantees to workers for their retirements and their pensions, etc. We're at a point now where if you were to tax the American public to the tune of 100% of their income for the next 20 years, you wouldn't put a dent in the interest.
And we see the economy falling apart. And before, people said, you know, I can't really believe that this is all by design. How do just tens of trillions of dollars go missing? And then Ben Bernanke, the Fed chairman, just laughs at congressmen and senators when they ask him, hey, where's the missing trillions?
Some of the heads who were in charge of the accounting said, we just don't know where it went.
When everybody's struggling in this economy, Ben Bernanke's out celebrating at this huge gala event with all these rich, elite, powerful people. And meanwhile, there's children starving. What'd you do at the 2008 Bilderberg meeting?
I'm not doing any press today.
For people in high office and high places, there is no accountability. And they like that. And it's a wonderful situation to be in. Never having to answer for what you've done.
If the government deliberately devalues and destroys the valuable currency, it will destroy the middle class and the wealth will gravitate to the wealthy.
So when you print money, you literally expand the gap between rich and poor.
We are in debt, our kids are in debt, our grandchildren are in debt. It is time to stop.
When the United States defaults on its debt, which it will, to the Federal Reserve. It's not a question if, it's a question when. Each citizen has been placed on collateral, which is a Social Security number. So that means when it defaults on the debt, it's going to go to its collateral, which is you and me.
So first of all, when you're born, you're enslaved. Look at your identifications. Your name is all in capitals. It means you're a corporation. That's your serial number. That's your ticket number.
Everybody's given one of these when you were born. Okay?
That's your PIN number, meaning that you're going to pay interest to the Federal Reserve System, you know, as you grow up and get older, because the Federal Reserve borrows against us as debtors.
This, proven the fact that you're a number.
Politicians in the New World Order. Who's the one to blame when your dollars worth a quarter? Bankers, politicians of the New World Order.
And if I recall, back in 2009, I think it was, they said that people with incomes are a threat to their agenda. It seems to me that they want to make sure that the people don't have any money to fight back. Just even the little crumbs.
We have pulled this economy back from the brink.
There is no recovery. Everyone is going to feel this, even if they're not feeling it now.
Well, the thing that my baseball coach as a child taught me the most is that in life you are going to lose. We can't have a society of winners. There's not that many college students in the world, right?
I get up and I work every day for family and generations after me. I just don't know what their lives are going to be like. You know, that's my biggest fear, is what are we all going to pay for 50 years from now.
Our deficits are to such a degree that when you cannot cover it via taxation, no one's willing to loan you money anymore. And that's what we've been doing. We've been borrowing our way to financial prosperity from foreign central banks. And they won't lend to us anymore because they know mathematically we cannot pay it back via taxation. Bottom line, that's what this is about. They're just creating money, they're devaluing it, and there's no alternative.
The direction we're going in right now is debt and dependency. You understand the principles of the debt super cycle. And eventually that super cycle comes to an end because you can only print and borrow so much money. You've seen the dot-com bubble, you've seen the housing bubble, and if you understand the Austrian school, we're already building that next bubble.
The U.S. Treasury bond is the largest bubble out there, bigger than the credit card and the education bubble. It's several times bigger, and they're going to discover this unfortunate fact very painfully. And what happens then in times of economic crises is you go back to the world reserve currency, you buy up U.S. Treasury bills because it's a store of value. What's happening today is you're seeing that panicked flight to safety into the U.S. dollar. The dollar's not going up in value. It's still very gradually going down in value.
All it's going to take for us to crumble financially is for the world leaders to drop the dollar.
They can dump that on our market at any time. Create overnight hyperinflation. That means all commerce shuts down.
Well, if you know that in 6 months your dollars are going to lose 20% of the value, you're not going to hold on to them and save them, which is what we depend upon. You're sure as hell not going to back your currency by them. You're going to buy shit up while the buying's good. You see it now. You got China out buying up infrastructure all over the United States, Russia doing the same thing.
So they're taking these worthless US dollars and they're buying up this country.
And then there'll be a flight to safety in commodities, gold, silver, etc., to save what you have left. So essentially, at some point, all of the world's banks are going to dump dollars, and those dollars are going to start chasing goods and services. And as the means of production becomes more and more handicapped by government intervention, more and more regulation, less people are going to invest, the whole thing falls apart.
Now, look at the news. You see this is happening right now. The smartest minds in the world are saying these bonds are cooked. We've had it. The rally is over. The long-awaited bond apocalypse is happening, and I think it is happening in the next month, 2 months, 3 months. It's happening now.
So, what is real wealth? Is it in a paper currency again? No, that's just paper. It's kindling, it's something to write on, it's something to wipe your backside with. What does that paper get you? Goods and services. What does a bank confiscate? Do they come after your paper? No, they come after your house. They come after your cars. They come after the actual goods and services that had the value to begin with.
And that's why everyone who's inside the Beltway is so desperate to convince everyone it won't happen. Because there is no way to avoid it anymore.
The economy is going to be okay. Keep them working because you don't want to create pandemonium. Start getting the people too scared about what's going on and start fearing the government, then they're going to have a revolution. They can't have that. They want to keep it on the tipping point where they have control.
They're going to use our own money to enslave us and collapse the monetary system at the same time, because again, every currency on earth is backed by US dollars. If there's nothing to replace it, you only have chaos.
In June of 1929, Mr. Mellon, who was the Secretary of the Treasury, told the American people that they lived in an era of unbroken prosperity, that they had nothing to fear. At the same time, he was liquidating all of his investments in the market. He was putting everything into cash and gold. He wasn't alone. Mr. Geithner recently made the statement that our banks are solvent, that there is no issue. We have nothing to be concerned about. Nothing could be further from the truth.
Jewelries. Jewelries.
The whole idea about conditioning the kids is the idea of creating a new generation that thinks differently than the previous generation. Teaching the kids that they should think a certain way, or they should feel a certain way, or they should vote a certain way.
Jewelries.
In the late 1800s, you have the emergence of psychology, the study of psychology, how people think and how people can specifically be manipulated.
Jewelries.
If you're familiar with the psychology of B.F. Skinner, what he would have you believe is that human beings are not creatures of introspection. They're not creatures of internal cognition. They have no soul, they have no thought processes, they have no free will. What they are animals to be trained. So you have Skinner's operant conditioning chamber, or the Skinner box, where he trains mice to perform for him based on a system of punishment and reward. Essentially what it does is it bypasses brain function and goes straight to an animal training method. You create a problem, offer a solution that drives them toward a pre-designed response. This is called the Hegelian dialectic.
The Hegelian dialectic is a formula and a strategy for creating a problem to then offer a solution that you have to the very problem that you've created to get the outcome that you desire that you wouldn't have been able to get if you didn't create the problem in the first place.
The Hegelian social theory was adopted by Lenin, by Marx, and it was applied politically in the form of communism and socialism. A German psychologist, Wilhelm Wundt, he is the first one to apply it to education.
For 85% of the American population, what is school supposed to do? Provide a path to employment and good citizenship.
I'm not going to go into a lot of great depth and detail in the Council of Foreign Relations, but you're looking at an organization essentially set up by Rockefeller and other central bankers, people who are responsible for the creation of the Federal Reserve, to debate education policy in the United States. It used to be that education was run by the states. Today you have funding and financing taking place with the federal government, whereby if public schooling systems don't do what they want, they get their funding cut.
The Reese Foundation, the Ford Foundation, the Carnegie Foundation, and the Rockefeller Foundation, all these major foundations that can actually give American taxpayer subsidized grants to individuals who do things according to their criteria.
A tax credit is when you get to keep your money because of some reason. A subsidy is when I, the government, actually collect that money, and then I turn around and pick a certain behavior that I want, and then I subsidize that.
This was revealed in the book Lines of Credit, Ropes of Bondage, in which H.R. Gaither of the Ford Foundation revealed to Norman Dodd of the Reese Foundation that they were taking their directives from the White House. The American education system is a combination of Hegelian social theory and experimental psychology. They destroy things like competition between students, because if they tell you there's no competition, there's no reason to exceed. There's no reason to excel. There's no incentive for upward mobility. That's animal training for the workforce.
So you have to attack the families. You have to say parents aren't fit to be parents. So the state has to come in and control that. And then you have to control what the children are eating, what they're being fed, what they're being taught, what they're watching. Because you have to begin to set up the generation gaps.
And that's the whole idea behind working with the kids and dealing with our kids, this concept of in loco parentis, that the school is the parents when the parents are not there.
Most people are too busy working the 9 to 5, and now that 9 to 5 is turning into 9 to 9 to be able to just survive, crippling the amount of time we have to transfer knowledge and information to our children who are young. So by making sure both parents are away from the children at work, they can guarantee that the social environment of school, preschool, daycare is going to be able to give the children the knowledge that they want to.
And what you have is the degradation of the individual, you have the promotion of the state, and you have the elimination of the middle class. Now, under this operant conditioning from Skinner, and under a system of reward and punishment, the only thing you learn is how not to get punished and how to achieve your reward. You're not going to come away from this system thinking, I'm going to stand up for something because it's right. You're going to do it because there's either reward or consequence involved. They're being trained to enter the workforce as a valueless cog in the state.
I'm a product of the public school system, and nobody ever taught me anything. I mean, I think we read the Declaration of Independence in the 5th grade, possibly. But I think the school systems are designed to keep people uninformed and to not understand the scope of their rights and where they come from. I think the powers that be would ultimately love everyone to believe that their rights come from the state.
It takes about 20 years for this sort of system of thought to instill itself in a generation, unchecked by traditional values. What you see is the same system employed by Stalin. And basically this is being done in America right now.
We're developing them to not question authority. We're developing them to be entitled, that the government will take care of them from cradle to grave. These efforts have been pretty successful.
No one questions their shackles if they're born into them.
Jewel beat. Jewel beat.
We have whole generations of kids that are being raised to not think like free people, to think like slaves, to think like they don't have self-determination.
The state's goal is to get your children to turn against you in the name of the state, and that's where we are shifting now. We are shifting from an individualistic paradigm to groupthink.
They want to be led. They want to be sheep. They want to be part of the masses.
Critical reasoning, critical thought, individualism. I mean, those are huge concepts. I mean, they're universal concepts, but to be able to control the masses, you have to get rid of that. Because if you don't, you can't control those people.
It's the alleviation of personal responsibility because the experts are in control. Let them handle it.
Hello, New York!
I love USA! USA! Political parties shouldn't exist. We ought to be voting for a candidate based upon principles, character, things like that. It keeps us from being able to fight over party lines. You look today, you have party platforms. These are things that we all have to agree on. And if not, you are not a part of this party. Well, look at Ron Paul right now. He's against taxation. Well, a lot of people in the GOP, we like that. But he's against the wars. Well, you must be one of those Democrats then.
The old saying, divide and conquer. So they try to just divide people into two different groups so that you can't unify. It's easier to manage a population when you have two primary belief systems. You're either A or you're B.
These people are conditioned to think a certain way and support a certain team. You know, they pick their winning team, whether it's Democrat or Republican, and then that's their guy. And it doesn't matter what that person votes for. As long as their guy wins, they put their pennant up, whether it's got a donkey or an elephant on it, and they wave it and they say, my guy won. Things are going to be different.
It's so much easier to lie to the masses when the masses aren't involved. There's no better way to discourage the masses from getting involved than by creating convoluted, controlled dialogue based upon party platforms versus individual principle. They'll say out of one corner of their mouth that they want you to vote, they want you to participate, and then we notice statistically that there's less participation today than there ever has been. And that's exactly the way they want it. It's all theater, it's just political theater.
We go from rule based on constitutional law to rule based on a cult of personality. Well, he might be wrong, but he's my president, so I'm going to stand with him. That's a very dangerous mode of thinking. Do you support freedom and the American Constitution, or do you support this person? We've all seen where that led in Cambodia and Russia and Germany.
Bush and Cheney, everybody's got to obey the laws, including the president and vice president. Vote for Democrats. Obama, yeah.
Woo! I'm sure if you ask the average Obama supporter if they have good intentions or not, you know, they're going to say, of course.
The path to hell is paved with good intentions.
You know, Obama's just as bad as the rest of them.
Why do you say that?
What's he done? He's one of the most war-hungry presidents we've ever seen. He has not fulfilled any of his policies that he promised at all.
The economy is still tanked. The taxes are still high.
I'll make our government open and transparent. One of my priorities as president is opening up the White House to the American people.
That White House tour will be canceled until further notice.
I intend to close Guantanamo, and I will follow through on that. We will bring an end to this war. I will be held accountable. These are bills that Congress ran up.
You will not see your taxes increase one single time.
Cut the deficit we inherited by half. If I don't have this done in 3 years, then there's going to be a one-term proposition.
If you had a spouse who broke their promise 95% of the time, you'd get a divorce.
This is all fact, but people still support him.
Obama's name is in the Bible. I prayed and I believe that God picked the right president.
hanging in your living room.
The Obamanoids. You're going to have 20 to 25% of the American public who will always support Obama no matter what he does because their own ego is on the line and they won't admit it.
Actually, those are not facts. What you just stated, those wasn't facts.
Everybody's happy to re-elect President Obama. Yeah!
What's your favorite thing about President Obama?
I could list a million different reasons.
It's truthful.
It's for public education, and he wants to restore it back to where it belongs.
Yes, everybody in Cleveland, low minority, got Obama phone. Keep Obama in president, you know. He gave us a phone.
Healthcare.
Healthcare, yeah.
His public speaking skills are immaculate. Yeah.
He's so smart, he was funny, he was captivating.
He understands where we come from as individuals.
He's definitely for the people.
Obama is my boy, man. He just know what to do.
Love Obama. Let's go. Time to party. Let's go. I can give you 100 reasons.
Give me three. Three main reasons.
First of all, Obama is ensuring that
And the American people have been complacent over the last several decades. They've enjoyed unparalleled prosperity. And let's face it, the average American on the street, he's not interested in what's happening in Kuwait. He could care less about Libya or something else. And so if you tell him, well, listen, we're bombing for democracy, goodness, freedom, human rights, so he said, okay, it doesn't affect him. He doesn't have to go. Children don't have to go. There doesn't appear to be any risk to him. Now that's changing.
He's done everything Bush did, but more.
Oh, I don't agree with that.
Well, he had to continue what was started. You can't just say, okay, we're done.
Well, sure, he didn't end the wars, but there are wars now, so we're in support of it. And, oh, well, sure, he hasn't completely pulled out of Iraq, but at least he's reducing the number of troops there. Oh, so it's diet tyranny. It's tyranny light now.
There's a lot of other reasons why I'm going to vote for Obama, and hearing that stuff honestly doesn't change it.
For the greater good, most of the policies he's put in place, I agree with.
And he's challenging the status quo.
Well, he is the status quo.
Obama's going to take us forward.
The president and the first lady are kind of like the mom and the dad of the country. And when your dad says something, you listen.
I pledge
to be a servant to our president
and all mankind, because together we can, together we are, and together
I know people who have destroyed relationships with their families when they realize that their neocon uncle and their liberal cousin weren't just well-intentioned, that they were creating a justification for coercive government and ideology, that they were externalizing their own desires to control others, and that was reflected in those relationships.
It always is. I mean, no evil person or evil group of people are ever acknowledging that what they're doing is evil.
I want nonviolence.
Yes, so do I.
Nonviolence. No, you don't. You're an Obama supporter.
Do you think he wants to go kill people with drone strikes?
Well, then
that's what he wants to do?
He orders it done, so I would assume.
All right,
so.
you're out of your mind.
People are aware of the truth. People choose not to accept the truth. There's a difference with this. People who are completely unaware of the truth, those are becoming few.
It's self-deception. How can you be honest in a political debate or any other contest if you're deceiving yourself first?
The people who will, just do what the party wants and do what they're told and vote the way they're told, and they just keep voting for the machine. After a certain point, there's no more deniability. They can't say, oh, I didn't know, or I didn't understand.
Americans accept propaganda from their government that if it came from the Soviet Union, they would have laughed at. But it comes from the Pentagon, and they get down and worship. They go around looking for ways to defend the propaganda.
You can find people all over that will say that we should end the war, but they have a lot of trouble saying that when they meet a soldier.
It was actually my older brother who talked me out of joining. We had a lot of conversations about the bravado of the current U.S. military forces, the the attitude. If you ever go into the military, it's definitely about psychological conditioning. It's the idea that when life and death is on the line, you cannot afford to believe anything but the fact that you are the biggest, baddest force on the face of the earth. It's like they say, you know, yeah, I walk through the valley, the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, because I'm the meanest motherfucker in the valley.
War is like a big video game that I can watch on my TV. And isn't it cool to see all the U.S. flags all over the foreign country, showing how the occupation is perceived?
They want you to believe that patriotism means that you support everything the government wants. If you don't support it, you don't support the troops.
Another day, man. Another day.
So we condition them, and we convince them that their cause is just, and that their enemy is subhuman and not worthy of living. And the American people honestly play a role in that.
They come back, and the reception they receive is just astounding. Brave soldiers that come from a combat zone defending our freedoms. Let's give them a round of applause. Who wouldn't buy into that, really?
Thank you for serving our country, and God bless you.
USAA auto insurance is often handed down from generation to generation.
I'm given tax breaks for being a veteran. I'm given discounts on my car insurance. I can go to the commissary, you know, tax-free groceries. I get all the benefits I could ever want in the military. Why would I question that?
We have soldiers who are coming home, they look at all this, and they say, well, it seems like that was wrong, but how could I admit that that was wrong because I was a part of it?
You'll never know what we go through for your freedoms, but at no point does anyone question how are they defending our freedoms by invading a foreign country.
Well, you didn't serve, you don't know. Well, then what happens when a guy like Jesse Ventura, who not only served, but served in the SEALs, he comes out and he speaks and he says the same thing. Oh, he served, but. There is no but. He served. He knows. He's been there.
I was over in the Persian Gulf getting ready to liberate Kuwait, which is a kingdom, a dictatorship, and here I am liberating their oil assets from Iraq. I thought I was doing the right thing too. And it's really hard to look back on that and say, hey, you know, that military conflict that I was in, that my friends died in, that I got shot at in, I have nightmares about, I guess that really should have never happened.
And unfortunately, the media has worked tirelessly to ensure that this truth doesn't reach the American people.
In the past, we had the media to watch the government and keep them in line and ask the tough questions.
You all remember those clips in the old days, the black and white, and you'd see the news guys with the fedoras, yeah. They'd always go up and they'd be in people's face with the big flash bulbs, you know, Senator, this happened. You'd always hear, you know, politicians being held accountable and they're always being asked questions, and you don't see that anymore.
Leaders have found a way to call the masses into their own ideal sets. And whether that's through bread and circus, such as the Roman Empire, or today through the mainstream media, they get to decide that, yes, you're going to be obsessed with American Idol for over a decade, and when that starts to wane, you know, we'll come up with Dancing with the Stars, and let's really be concerned about who wins the Super Bowl.
3 keys to power are banking, the media, and politics. If you own the banks, you can buy the media, you can buy the politicians. If you own the media, you can control what people see, what people think, you can largely shape the culture, you can create and shape people's fears, people's desires, the perceptions that they have of events.
In high definition.
Piers Morgan, live.
This is an ABC News.
In 1975, there was a Senate investigation committee called the Church Hearings, which actually uncovered that the CIA was paying, under the table, mainstream media outlets $250 million a year to act as gatekeepers and propagandists. In today's terms, that's $1 billion a year. Of course, they say they don't do that anymore, but it's foolish to think that they don't. Why do you think the top story is the top story on all major networks?
Carl Cameron, you know, he'll tell you straight up, I can't answer anything unless it comes from my editors.
I can't unless I've got it approved from media relations. I can only talk in front of my own camera. I'm sorry.
Geraldo, will you talk about Building 7? Talk about Building 7. Help educate the public.
If you get video of Sarah Palin or get a soundbite from her, bring that back to us. You can hold the Ron Paul stuff.
We single out something that the media likes to talk about, such as the Trayvon Martin issue.
Could have been me.
But we don't talk about the much more serious events that are already well underway.
When was the last time you saw images of caskets coming out of airplanes? You never do. So that's never in the mind frame.
It's this happened now, Paris Hilton fucked somebody else. Let's spend 2 weeks on that.
You can't say that this isn't newsworthy. Obviously there is a blackout in effect.
The mainstream media, though, wants to stay in business. And if they suddenly discover that the people listening to them don't want that message, they're not interested in listening to it, they'll change their tune.
A lot of them are doing solid investigative journalism. Watergate, people were held accountable. People were fired. People were demoted. People were dealt with. There were prison sentences handed out. At least there was the illusion of some kind of accountability back then.
The Obama administration was caught red-handed supplying weapons to the Mexican cartel. Why? Because the CIA wants a certain cartel wiped out, protecting their own drug interests. What happened? Nothing.
The American citizenry now, like you've said, Fast and the Furious, they've done a great job. We just don't give a shit.
First of all, I think that they shouldn't give us too much information, because anything that you and I can watch on television, our enemies can watch. Really, it's better to not say too much.
Don't worry about it. You know, go back to sleep.
It's amazing. The mainstream media can actually do its job, and it doesn't matter. The American public is now in a state of apathy, almost a state of numbness. And that's what I see, is like this is an entire country of people who are turning against the truth.
Controls in the desk right next to the textbook. Run tests and then test what let's look. Look at this, these heads in the mess, but I got this diploma.
But what are we developing the kids to do? We're developing them to not question authority. We're developing them to be entitled, that the government will take care of them from cradle to grave. You don't have parental rights anymore. Not just it takes a village to raise the child, but the village is now raising your child. When we condition the kids, what do we condition the kids to do? We always tell them always share, always work in teams.
See that table over there? We have 6 people sitting around. We always put 4 toys there. Not 6, but 4 toys. Because these kids have to learn how to share.
And that's a good lesson on some level. But what we don't teach the kids is that it's okay to keep the fruits of your labor. It's okay to work hard and earn and benefit from that.
Jewel Beat.
The thing about wealth is not a zero-sum game. There is wealth out there for everybody. All you have to do is be willing to work hard and earn it. The prevailing attitude in America today is almost that you should be ashamed to be successful. You should be ashamed to be rich. And that if you are rich, the assumption is that you got rich by taking from somebody else.
You will not find your justice in capitalism. You will not find your justice in the colonial government of the United States. You will find justice when the institutions of capitalism and colonialism are destroyed and they are replaced by sustainable ways of being that nurture and protect all life.
Right, you hear with this Occupy movement? Yeah. What are they doing? They're chilling.
People with a lot of capital want to make profit. I don't have to look it up. I know it.